Dr. Hana Kim rubbed her tired eyes as she finished another long day in the xenobiology lab aboard Titan Station. The massive space station orbited a distant moon, serving as humanity's most important research outpost in this sector of the galaxy. For the past 12 hours, she had been carefully examining rock samples brought back from a recent expedition to the outer rim worlds. Each tiny fragment had to be analyzed, cataloged, and stored properly. It was detailed work that required complete focus, but Hana loved discovering what secrets these alien minerals might hold. The lab grew quiet as her colleagues packed up and headed home to their quarters. Hana stretched her aching back and looked at the clock display floating above her workstation. It was nearly midnight station time. She had promised her husband June that she would try to get home earlier, but once again, work had pulled her in deeper than planned. He would understand, though. He always did. That was one of the many things she loved about him after 5 years of marriage. Hana sealed the last sample container and updated her research logs before finally leaving the sterile white corridors of the science wing. The station never truly slept. Even at this late hour, maintenance crews worked quietly in the background, keeping the massive structure running smoothly. Automated systems hummed softly as they recycled air, processed waste, and maintained the artificial gravity that kept everyone's feet planted firmly on the deck plates. She decided to take the longer route home through the station's central marketplace, rather than the direct path through the residential corridors. The market district stayed busy around the clock, filled with traders, travelers, and station residents looking for everything from exotic foods to rare technology. Dozens of different alien species mixed together in the wide corridors, creating a constant buzz of conversation in multiple languages. Universal translators built into everyone's communication devices made it possible for beings from across the galaxy to conduct business together. The air was thick with the smells of cooking food from various worlds. Vendors called out to potential customers, advertising their wares with enthusiastic voices. Holographic displays showed off everything from beautiful artwork to advanced computer systems. It was one of Hana's favorite places on the station because it reminded her that despite all their differences, different species could work together peacefully. She was walking past a stall selling colorful fabrics when someone bumped hard into her shoulder. Hana stumbled but caught herself, turning to apologize even though it wasn't really her fault. Standing behind her was a massive Vorthak trader she had seen around the station before. The reptilian alien towered over her at nearly 8 feet tall, his thick scaled hide a mottled green and brown color. His yellow eyes glared down at her with obvious anger. Grixaval was well known among the human community on Titan Station, and not in a good way. He had a reputation for being rude, aggressive, and looking down on what he considered lesser species. Most people tried to avoid him when possible. Hana had heard stories about his bad temper, but had never dealt with him directly before this moment. "Watch where you're going, human," Grixval snarled, his voice coming out as a harsh hiss through his translator device. His massive clawed hands were clenched into fists at his sides. "I'm sorry," Hana said politely, even though she knew the collision had been an accident. "I didn't see you there." But Grixval was already having a terrible day. He had just lost a major shipping contract to a competitor, costing him thousands of credits. His clan back on the Vorthak homeworld had been pressuring him to increase his profits or face shame among his people. Now this small human female had dared to bump into him and show him disrespect in front of other traders. "Sorry?" he roared, drawing attention from nearby shoppers. "You pathetic little mammal. You think sorry fixes anything?" Before Hana could react, Grixaval's massive clawed hand swept across her face in a vicious backhand strike. The blow sent her flying sideways into a vendor stall selling electronic components. She crashed through the display, sending small devices scattering across the floor as she hit the metal frame hard. Pain exploded through Hana's skull as blood began streaming down her face from deep cuts left by Grixaval's razor-sharp claws. She could feel that something was seriously wrong with the bones around her left eye. Her vision blurred as she tried to push herself up from the wreckage of the vendor stall. The marketplace erupted in shocked voices as people rushed toward the scene. Several humans immediately moved to help Hana, while others backed away from the still raging Vorthak. Grixval stood over her fallen form, breathing heavily and looking satisfied with what he had done. "That's what happens when you don't show proper respect," he declared loudly, making sure everyone could hear him. "Humans need to learn their place in this galaxy." Station security arrived within 3 minutes, their boots pounding against the deck plates as they rushed through the crowd. The lead officer, a stern-faced woman named Captain Torres, quickly assessed the situation while her team secured the area around the injured woman and the angry alien. "What happened here?" Torres demanded, her hand resting on the stun weapon, at her hip. Multiple witnesses immediately began explaining what they had seen. The story was clear and consistent. Grixval had attacked an innocent woman without any real provocation. It should have been a simple case of assault requiring immediate arrest and detention. But as Torres ran Grixval's identification through her scanner, her expression changed to one of frustration. The alien held official status as a registered trade ambassador, representing his clan's commercial interests. This gave him diplomatic immunity from most station laws and regulations. She could file a formal complaint, but actually arresting him would create an interstellar incident. "I want this creature arrested," shouted Dr. Martinez, the vendor whose stall had been destroyed. "He assaulted an innocent woman and wrecked my business." Grixval let out what passed for laughter among his species, a harsh barking sound that made several humans step back nervously. "Try it, human. Your little station laws don't apply to me. I represent the Vorthak Trade Consortium, and we have treaties with your pathetic government." Captain Torres gritted her teeth but knew he was right. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to return to your quarters while we investigate this incident." "Investigate all you want," Grixval replied with obvious contempt. "Maybe next time these weak mammals will watch where they're walking." He looked down at Hana, who was being helped to her feet by paramedics. "Consider this a lesson about showing proper respect to your betters." With that, the massive alien pushed through the crowd and walked away, leaving behind a scene of destruction and a seriously injured woman. The paramedics quickly loaded Hana onto a medical transport and rushed her toward the station's hospital wing. Initial scans showed a fractured orbital bone around her left eye and deep lacerations that would require immediate surgery. As news of the attack spread through the station's communication networks, anger began building among the human population. But none of them knew that the injured woman's husband was someone who could turn that anger into something far more dangerous than Grixval could possibly imagine. Lieutenant June Park was reviewing navigation charts in his small cabin aboard the patrol vessel, Constellation, when the emergency communication alert began flashing on his personal terminal. The ship was 2 days out from Titan Station, conducting routine security sweeps along the shipping lanes that connected the outer colonies to the main trade routes. It was supposed to be a quiet assignment, the kind of patrol duty that most officers found boring but June actually preferred. Quiet meant safe, and safe meant his wife Hana could continue her research work without worrying about him. The message header showed it was from Titan Station Medical, marked as Urgent Family Emergency. June's heart immediately started racing as he opened the transmission. The doctor's face appeared on his screen, professional but clearly concerned as she explained what had happened to his wife. An alien trader had attacked her in the marketplace, without warning. She was alive but had suffered serious injuries requiring surgery. June listened to every word with growing horror, his hands gripping the edge of his desk so tightly his knuckles turned white. The doctor assured him that Hana was receiving the best possible care, and that her injuries, while serious, were not life-threatening. She would need reconstructive surgery around her left eye and treatment for deep facial lacerations, but she would recover fully with time. "Can I speak with her?" June asked, his voice carefully controlled despite the storm of emotions building inside him. "She's sedated for surgery right now, but I can arrange a video call once she wakes up in a few hours," the doctor replied kindly. "Lieutenant, I want you to know that everyone here is taking excellent care of your wife. We've assigned our best surgical team to her case." After the transmission ended, June sat alone in his cabin for several minutes, staring at the blank screen. To anyone watching, he would have appeared to be a concerned husband processing terrible news about his injured wife. His crew members who knew him would expect him to be upset, maybe angry, but ultimately helpless, since they were still 2 days away from the station. What none of them could see was the cold calculation that had already begun working behind his worried expression. June Park, the ordinary military officer, was concerned about his wife's injuries and eager to get home to support her recovery. But there was another side to June that his crew had never glimpsed, a side that operated in the shadows where ordinary rules didn't apply. For the past 8 years, June had lived a carefully constructed double life. His official military record showed him as a competent but unremarkable officer who had served on various patrol ships and logistics assignments throughout the outer sectors. He had commendations for good service and steady performance reviews, but nothing that would make him stand out from thousands of other career military personnel. The reality was very different. June was one of the most effective covert operatives in human space, known in certain classified circles as the Ghost of Kepler. He had been personally responsible for eliminating 17 high-value targets across 3 different sectors, including terrorist leaders, rogue military commanders, and criminal kingpins who thought themselves untouchable. Each mission had been completed without leaving any trace that could be connected back to human intelligence services. His assignments came through encrypted channels that were impossible to trace. He would receive detailed intelligence packages about targets who posed threats to human interests, but existed beyond the reach of normal law enforcement. Pirates who raided colony ships, corrupt officials who sold human slaves to alien buyers, war criminals who had escaped justice through political connections. June would study each case carefully, plan his approach, and then make the problem quietly disappear. The work required him to become someone else entirely when on mission. He had learned to move without sound, to kill without hesitation, and to vanish without trace. But between assignments, he returned to his cover identity as Lieutenant Park, loving husband to Dr. Hana Kim. She knew him only as the gentle, caring man who brought her coffee every morning and listened patiently to her excited explanations of her latest research discoveries. Now someone had hurt his wife, and that someone was about to discover what happened when you attacked the family of humanity's most dangerous ghost. June accessed his personal terminal and began pulling up everything he could find about the incident through official channels. Station security reports, medical records, witness statements, and surveillance footage from the marketplace. The picture that emerged made his blood run cold. The attack had been completely unprovoked. Hana had simply been walking home from work when this creature decided to use her as an example of human weakness. But June needed more information than the official reports could provide. He activated a hidden partition on his terminal that gave him access to classified intelligence databases that most military officers never knew existed. Using his covert access codes, he began researching everything about Grixval that the human intelligence services had on file. What he found made his jaw clench with barely controlled rage. This wasn't the first time Grixval had attacked humans. Over the past 4 years, there had been at least 6 documented incidents of the alien using violence against human civilians on various stations and colonies. Each time, his diplomatic status had protected him from any real consequences. Station security would file complaints, but nothing ever came of them. Worse yet, Grixval was connected to several criminal organizations that operated in the gray areas between legitimate trade and outright smuggling. He had been suspected of involvement in arms trafficking, selling weapons to rebel groups and pirates who used them against human targets. The intelligence files suggested he might also be connected to slavery operations, though nothing had been proven definitively enough to take action through diplomatic channels. June sat back in his chair and considered his options. Through official channels, there was nothing he could do. Grixval's diplomatic immunity made him untouchable by station security or military justice. The alien would face no real consequences for what he had done to Hana or any of his previous victims. But June didn't operate through official channels. He activated his communication system and sent a carefully worded message to his commanding officer, requesting emergency family leave to care for his injured wife. The request would be approved immediately. No military commander would deny such a reasonable request under these circumstances. He also sent messages to several contacts who could help arrange faster transportation back to Titan Station than waiting for their patrol route to finish. To his crew, Lieutenant Park appeared to be doing exactly what any concerned husband would do under these circumstances. He was making arrangements to get home as quickly as possible to be with his wife. During her recovery, they saw him as focused and determined, but ultimately just another worried family man dealing with a crisis. None of them suspected that June was already planning how to make Grixval pay for what he had done. The alien had diplomatic immunity from station laws, but he had no protection from the ghost who moved in the shadows between worlds. Grixval thought his status made him untouchable, but he was about to learn that some predators didn't care about diplomatic protocols. The hunt was about to begin, and the prey had no idea what was coming for him. June's transport docked at Titan Station 36 hours after receiving the emergency message about his wife. He had managed to catch a fast courier ship that cut nearly a full day off his journey time. During the trip, he had maintained constant communication with the medical staff, checking on Hana's condition and surgery progress. To everyone who spoke with him, he appeared to be exactly what he claimed to be, a worried husband desperate to reach his injured wife. The moment he stepped off the transport, June headed straight to the medical wing. His heart actually did skip a beat when he saw Hana lying in the hospital bed, her face swollen and bandaged from the reconstructive surgery. The left side of her face was covered in healing patches where the alien's claws had torn through her skin. She was awake but groggy from pain medication. "June," she whispered when she saw him enter the room. "You came so fast." He pulled a chair close to her bed and took her hand gently in both of his. "Of course I came fast. Nothing in this universe could have kept me away from you." His voice was soft and filled with genuine love and concern. When he looked at her injuries, real tears formed in his eyes. For the next 4 hours, June stayed by Hana's side, holding her hand while she drifted in and out of medicated sleep. He spoke quietly with her doctors about her treatment plan and recovery timeline. He arranged for her favorite flowers to be delivered to her room. He contacted her research supervisor to let them know she would need extended medical leave. Every action was that of a devoted husband caring for his injured wife. But during the quiet moments when Hana was sleeping, something else was happening behind June's caring expression. While his hands gently stroked her hair, his mind was cataloging every detail of her injuries and building a detailed picture of exactly what had been done to her. The cold, calculating part of his personality was awakening, analyzing the situation like a predator studying its prey. When visiting hours ended, that evening, June kissed Hana's forehead and promised to return first thing in the morning. He walked slowly back to their quarters in the residential section, looking every bit like a tired, worried husband. But once he was alone behind locked doors, Lieutenant Park disappeared, and the ghost of Kepler took his place. June activated his hidden communication equipment and began reaching out to his intelligence contacts throughout the station. Within 2 hours, he had detailed information about Grixval's current location, business activities, security arrangements, and daily routines. The alien was staying in the luxury quarters section reserved for high-status diplomatic visitors. He had 2 Vorthak bodyguards with him, and conducted most of his business from a private office in the commercial district. More importantly, June learned that Grixval was planning to leave Titan Station in exactly 72 hours aboard a private cargo vessel bound for Vorthak space. Once the alien reached his home territory, he would be completely beyond reach. If June was going to act, he had a narrow window of opportunity. Through his classified database access, June pulled up everything the intelligence services knew about Grixval's criminal activities. The picture that emerged was even worse than he had initially thought. Over the past 3 years, the alien had been involved in at least 6 documented attacks on human civilians across different stations and colonies. Each incident followed the same pattern. Grixval would become angry about something unrelated, then take out his frustration on whatever human happened to be nearby. A young maintenance worker on Kepler Station had been hospitalized with broken ribs after bumping into Grixval in a corridor. A human restaurant owner on New Geneva had suffered a concussion when Grixval decided the service was too slow. An elderly human woman on Proxima Base had been knocked unconscious simply for asking Grixval to lower his voice in a library. In every case, the alien's diplomatic status had protected him from any real consequences. But the attacks were just the visible surface of Grixeval's criminal activities. Intelligence reports suggested he was deeply involved in illegal arms trafficking, selling advanced weapons to pirates and terrorist groups that used them against human targets. There were also unconfirmed reports linking him to slavery operations, though the evidence wasn't strong enough for diplomatic action. The next morning, June returned to the medical wing to spend time with Hana. He brought her breakfast from her favorite cafe and read to her from research journals while she recovered. To any observer, he was the perfect caring husband, completely focused on helping his wife heal from her traumatic experience. But that afternoon, while Hana was sleeping, June began his real work. Using skills honed through years of covert operations, he started conducting surveillance on Grixeval. The aliens' luxury quarters were located in a section of the station that June could observe from multiple vantage points without being detected. He studied the creature's daily patterns, noting when he left his rooms, where he went, who he met with, and what security measures were in place. Grixeval seemed to follow a fairly predictable routine. He woke late each morning and spent several hours conducting business communications with contacts throughout Vortex space. Around midday, he would leave his quarters with his 2 bodyguards and visit various trading offices in the commercial district. He typically ate at expensive restaurants that catered to alien dietary requirements, always demanding the best tables and loudest in his complaints when service didn't meet his expectations. The alien clearly believed his diplomatic status made him untouchable. He moved through the station with arrogant confidence, never bothering to vary his routes or take basic security precautions. His bodyguards were large and intimidating but seemed to be more for show than actual protection. They were used to dealing with angry business partners or upset vendors, not trained killers who moved like shadows. By the end of his second day of surveillance, June had identified several opportunities for action, but he wasn't ready to move yet. This wasn't going to be a simple elimination mission. Grixeval needed to understand exactly what he had brought upon himself by attacking Hana. The alien needed to experience fear before he died. As June continued his observations over the following days, he began to notice something interesting. Grixeval was becoming increasingly paranoid and nervous. The alien kept looking over his shoulder when walking through corridors. He had started varying his meal times and routes through the station. His communications with his bodyguards were becoming more frequent and urgent. Somehow, despite June's careful precautions, Grixeval was beginning to sense that he was being watched. The alien's predatory instincts were picking up on the fact that he had become prey, even though he couldn't identify the source of the threat. This was actually better than June had hoped. Fear was already beginning to eat away at the creature's confidence. Each evening, June would return to Hana's bedside, bringing her flowers and updates about friends who had asked about her recovery. He would hold her hand and listen to her talk about getting back to her research work. His love for her was completely genuine, but it was now mixed with something far more dangerous. The predator was circling his prey, and the hunt was about to begin in earnest. June spent another day watching Grixeval's movements and studying his business operations before deciding on his approach. A quick elimination would be too merciful for someone who had hurt Hana so brutally. The alien needed to understand what true fear felt like before his story came to an end. June wanted Grixeval to experience the same helplessness that Hana had felt when those claws tore across her face. The campaign began subtly. June used his covert access codes to penetrate the station's communication networks and identify all of Grixeval's current business partners and potential deals. The alien was involved in at least a dozen different trading arrangements, from legitimate cargo shipments to more questionable transactions involving restricted technology and weapons components. Over the next 2 days, each of these business relationships began falling apart in seemingly unrelated ways. A shipping company that had been negotiating a major contract with Grixeval suddenly received an anonymous data package containing evidence of his involvement in arms trafficking. The company's legal department immediately canceled all negotiations to avoid potential criminal liability. A mining consortium that was considering Grixeval as a middleman for rare metal exports got a similar package showing his connections to pirate groups that raided mining operations. They not only canceled their deal, but also shared the information with station security as a public safety concern. A technology firm discovered that Grixval had been selling their advanced computer systems to rebel groups in violation of export restrictions. Each revelation appeared to come from different sources, sometimes from competitors, sometimes from concerned citizens, sometimes from anonymous tipsters, but all of the information was carefully crafted by June to be both damaging and completely accurate. He wasn't manufacturing false evidence, he was simply making sure that Grixval's actual criminal activities became known to the right people, at the right times. Within 48 hours, Grixval's business network had collapsed completely. Partners who had been eager to work with him now refused to take his communications. Deals that had been nearly finalized were canceled without explanation. The alien's income stream dried up almost overnight, and his reputation in the trading community was destroyed. But June wasn't finished with the business side of his campaign. He began targeting the personal security that Grixval relied on to feel safe while conducting his illegal activities. The alien's 2 Vorthak bodyguards had been with him for over a year, and they provided both physical protection and peace of mind. June decided to remove that sense of security piece by piece. The first bodyguard, a massive warrior named Krex, suffered what appeared to be a random accident while walking through the station's industrial section. A maintenance platform that he was passing underneath suddenly malfunctioned, dropping a heavy piece of equipment that missed his head by inches but struck his shoulder hard enough to fracture the bone. Station investigators found that a critical safety sensor had mysteriously failed, causing the platform's load balancing system to malfunction. Krex was hospitalized with injuries that would keep him out of action for weeks. He kept insisting, to anyone who would listen, that someone had been watching him from the shadows just before the accident, but security footage showed only empty corridors. The incident was officially classified as an equipment failure, but Krex knew better. Someone was hunting them. 3 days later, the second bodyguard experienced his own accident. Vex was returning to their quarters late one evening when the corridor's artificial gravity system malfunctioned in a very localized area. He was suddenly thrown against the ceiling with tremendous force, then slammed back down to the deck when gravity returned to normal. The impact left him with a severe concussion and several cracked ribs. Station engineers were baffled by the malfunction. The gravity generators showed no signs of damage or wear, and all safety systems had been functioning normally right up until the moment of failure. They could find no explanation for why the system would malfunction in such a precise location, and then immediately return to normal operation. Vex was convinced that someone had deliberately targeted him, but there was no evidence to support his claims. With both of his bodyguards hospitalized, Grixval found himself alone and increasingly paranoid. The alien began varying his routines randomly, taking different routes through the station and changing his schedule without warning. He started carrying a personal weapon despite station regulations prohibiting armed civilians in most areas. Sleep became difficult as he found himself constantly listening for sounds that might indicate someone approaching his quarters. But June wasn't done dismantling the alien's sense of security. The next phase of his campaign was designed to make Grixval question whether his own people might be behind his troubles. Using his intelligence contacts and technical skills, June began planting false information that suggested the aliens' troubles were coming from within the Vorthak community itself. June fabricated communication intercepts that appeared to show Grixval's own clan leaders discussing his recent activities with displeasure. The fake messages suggested that his attacks on humans were bringing unwanted attention to Vorthak trading operations throughout human space. There were references to cleaning up the mess and removing embarrassments to the family name. These fabricated communications were planted in locations where Grixval would find them through his own intelligence-gathering efforts. When the alien discovered what appeared to be evidence that his own clan had marked him for elimination, his paranoia reached new heights. Every Vorthak he encountered became a potential assassin sent by his own people. The alien's behavior became increasingly erratic. He would change tables multiple times when eating at restaurants, convinced that other Vorthak diners were watching him. He began wearing disguises when moving through public areas of the station, His communications with contacts back in Vorthak space became frantic as he tried to determine whether the threats against him were real. When Grixval realized that his situation on Titan Station had become untenable, he decided to flee early, rather than wait for his scheduled departure. He contacted the captain of a cargo vessel that was leaving for Vorthak space ahead of schedule, and paid triple the normal passenger fee for immediate transport. The alien packed his belongings quickly and headed for the docking bay, convinced that escape was finally within reach. But when Grixval arrived at the cargo ship, he discovered that his escape route had been cut off. The vessel's navigation computer had suffered what appeared to be a critical system failure that would require days to repair. The backup navigation systems had also mysteriously malfunctioned, leaving the ship unable to plot safe courses through hyperspace. The ship's captain was genuinely confused by the technical problems. His navigation systems had been working perfectly just hours earlier, and his engineering crew could find no explanation for the simultaneous failures. All of the hardware appeared to be functioning normally, but the software that controlled hyperspace calculations had become corrupted in ways that made no technical sense. Grixval was trapped on Titan Station with nowhere to run and no one to trust. His business empire had collapsed, his security was gone, and even his own people appeared to want him dead. The once arrogant alien who had boasted about human weakness now jumped at every shadow and suspicious noise. What Grixval didn't realize was that his nightmare was just beginning. The predator circling him had not yet begun to show his true capabilities. Grixval had not slept properly in 4 days. Every sound in the station's ventilation system made him jump. Every footstep in the corridor outside his quarters sent waves of panic through his massive frame. The alien who had once strutted through public spaces with arrogant confidence now cowered behind locked doors, afraid to venture outside even for food. His luxury quarters had been transformed into a makeshift fortress. Heavy furniture was pushed against the door as additional barriers. The windows were covered with thick blankets to prevent anyone from seeing inside. Grixval had managed to acquire a military-grade plasma rifle through his remaining criminal contacts, though possessing such a weapon on the station was highly illegal. He clutched it constantly, his clawed hands shaking as he tried to watch every entrance point simultaneously. The alien's reptilian features were drawn with exhaustion and fear. His normally bright yellow eyes had become dull and constantly darting, from shadow to shadow. He had barely eaten anything in 2 days, surviving on emergency rations and recycled water from his quarters' basic systems. The proud Vorthak trader who had boasted about human weakness had been reduced to a trembling, paranoid wreck. As the station's artificial night cycle reached its deepest hours, Grixval sat in the corner of his main room with his back against the wall. From this position, he could see both the main entrance and the secondary access hatch that maintenance crews used for system repairs. The plasma rifle lay across his knees, fully charged and ready to fire at the first sign of movement. But despite all his precautions, Grixval never noticed the environmental control panel near the ceiling beginning to move with almost imperceptible slowness. The panel slid aside silently, revealing an access shaft just large enough for a human to crawl through. For several minutes, nothing happened. Then, like smoke given form, a dark figure began emerging from the opening. June had spent hours studying the station's technical blueprints and maintenance tunnels. The environmental systems required regular inspection and cleaning, which meant there were hidden passages throughout the station that most residents never knew existed. These service corridors were perfect for someone who needed to move unseen, through areas that were supposedly secure. He dropped from the ceiling with the silence of a falling feather, his feet touching the floor without making even the whisper of sound. Years of training and practical experience had taught him to move his body in ways that seemed to defy the laws of physics. His breathing was controlled and steady. His heartbeat remained calm despite the adrenaline coursing through his system. Grixval was still staring at the main door when June appeared directly behind him like a materialized nightmare. The alien's predatory instincts finally registered the presence of danger, but by then it was already too late. Grixval spun around with his plasma rifle, his yellow eyes wide with terror as he came face to face with his hunter. "Looking for me?" June asked quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. Grixaval tried to bring his weapon to bear, but his hands were shaking too badly to aim properly. Before he could pull the trigger, June moved with fluid precision that seemed almost supernatural. One moment the alien was holding a dangerous weapon. The next moment the rifle was flying across the room and Grixaval was flat on his back with a human boot pressed against his throat. "Please," Grixaval gasped, his voice distorted by the pressure on his windpipe. "I have money, rare metals, information about shipping routes. Whatever you want, I can give you." June applied just enough pressure to make breathing difficult, but not impossible. He wanted the alien conscious and aware for what came next. "What I want is very simple," he said calmly. "I want you to understand exactly who you decided to attack when you hurt my wife." The alien's eyes widened even further as the implications of those words sank in. "Your wife? The human female? But you're just a military officer. The records show what they're supposed to show," June replied. "My name is Lieutenant June Park, husband to Dr. Hana Kim. But in certain circles, I'm known by a different name. They call me the Ghost of Kepler." Recognition dawned in Grixval's terrified eyes. Even criminals in the outer sectors had heard whispered stories about the ghost who eliminated targets that other agencies couldn't touch. High-value criminals who disappeared without trace. Terrorist leaders who vanished from heavily guarded compounds. War criminals who simply stopped existing one day without explanation. "You're him," Grixaval whispered, his voice filled with the kind of primal fear that comes from facing a true apex predator. "But why? She was just another human. They're everywhere. Why does this one matter?" June's expression didn't change, but his voice took on a quality that made the alien's blood run cold. "Because she's mine. Because when you hurt her, you declared war on something far more dangerous than you could possibly imagine. Because you've spent years attacking innocent people and thinking your diplomatic status would protect you forever." The alien tried to speak, to beg, to offer some desperate bargain that might save his life. But June wasn't interested in negotiations. He had already decided how this story would end. "Here's what's going to happen," June explained with the calm tone of someone discussing the weather. "You're going to experience a tragic accident. The environmental systems in these luxury quarters aren't as well maintained as they should be. Sometimes there are slow atmospheric leaks that cause oxygen levels to drop gradually. By the time anyone notices something's wrong, it's usually too late." As if summoned by his words, there was a barely audible hiss from somewhere in the room's ventilation system. Grixval's enhanced hearing picked up the sound immediately, and his eyes darted around frantically trying to locate its source. "The beautiful thing about atmospheric leaks," June continued conversationally, "is that they're completely silent killers. You just gradually become drowsy as the oxygen level drops. Eventually you fall asleep and then you simply don't wake up. No violence, no obvious signs of murder. Just a tragic maintenance failure that station investigators will blame on poor safety protocols." Grixaval struggled against the boot on his throat, but his movements were already becoming sluggish as the modified atmosphere began affecting his respiratory system. "Please," he gasped. "I was angry about business deals. I didn't mean to hurt her so badly, it was just temper." "Just temper," June repeated thoughtfully. "Like all those other humans you've attacked over the years. Just temper that you thought would never have consequences because of your diplomatic immunity." The alien's breathing became more labored as the oxygen content in the room continued dropping to carefully calculated levels. June had studied Vorthak physiology extensively and knew exactly how to make this appear natural, while ensuring the process was irreversible. "The funny thing is," June said as Grixval's struggles grew weaker, "if you had just kept your hands to yourself, you would have completed your business and left this station safely. You could have lived for decades more continuing your criminal activities and thinking yourself untouchable. But you made one critical mistake." Grixval's yellow eyes were beginning to glaze over, but he was still conscious enough to listen. "You hurt someone I love," June finished simply. 20 minutes later, June slipped back through the environmental access shaft, leaving behind what would appear to be the tragic death of a diplomatic visitor due to faulty life support systems. He sealed the access panel and made his way through the maintenance tunnels back to the residential section of the station. An hour after that, He was sitting beside Hana's hospital bed, holding her hand while she slept peacefully under mild sedation. Her face was healing well, and the doctors expected her to make a full recovery within a few weeks. To anyone who saw them together, they were simply a devoted couple dealing with a traumatic incident with love and mutual support. The next morning, station security discovered Grixval's body and began their investigation into what appeared to be a mechanical failure in the luxury quarters' environmental systems. The preliminary report suggested that a slow atmospheric leak had gradually reduced oxygen levels until they became fatal. It was exactly the kind of maintenance-related accident that occasionally happened on large space stations with thousands of complex systems to monitor. News of the alien trader's death spread quickly through both official channels and the informal networks that connected criminal organizations throughout the sector. The official story was mechanical failure, but certain circles began whispering about something more interesting. Word traveled through alien communities that there might be consequences for attacking human civilians, even when diplomatic immunity seemed to provide protection. 3 weeks later, Hana was released from the medical facility with her injuries fully healed and her research clearance restored. She and June returned to their quiet life together, with her focusing on her xenobiology work and him returning to routine patrol duties. To everyone who knew them, they were just another ordinary couple who had survived a difficult time together. But throughout the outer sectors, the legend of humanity's hidden protectors grew a little stronger. The story of what happened to those who harmed a human's family became another whispered warning in the darkness between stars.